Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight. My name is Hubert Kozak. I'm a librarian here at the Burbank Public Library. And this program tonight is called What Does a Video Editor Do? It's a program of our Spark Media Lab here at the Burbank Public Library. This program tonight is part of the Burbank Public Library's commitment to inform our patrons about subjects relating to the local film and television industry, an industry of major economic importance in our community. We're trying to create a better understanding of the work of various industry professionals and businesses involved in that activity, and a greater appreciation of the art product produced here and its contribution to our national culture. We want to let our patrons know about the kind of career and employment opportunities the industry might offer to those who live and work here and how to access those. In addition to this informational role, we have made available to those interested in these fields some hands-on tools for developing skills relevant to important fields in the industry. And also, we want to provide a space and work tools for those doing independent work. That's why the library recently created its Spark Media Lab, and we'll tell you a little bit more about that as we get towards the end of the program. Tonight, we're going to give you an idea of what a video editor does, what it's like to work in this field, what education and skills you might need, how you might break into the field, and how to develop a career in video editing. We thought the best way to do that was to talk to a working professional in the field. We're lucky to have as our guest tonight, Gayane Grajian, a television and documentary editor with 15 years of entertainment experience in a variety of capacities, from reality and scripted television to documentaries. Starting out as a logger and post-production assistant, Gayane eventually worked her way up the ladder to become an editor for major networks. Her many credits include hit television shows such as Real World, Keeping Up with the Kardashians, and work on 100 Years from Home, a film that was nominated for Best Documentary at the ARPA Film Festival. If you want to know more about Gayane, I suggest you take a look at her profile on IMDb. You'll find out more about the work she's done, but it's also kind of instructive because you'll get to see what kind of different jobs and what a career looks like in this field. So I think it's worth taking a look after this show. The way things will go tonight is I'm going to pose some questions to Gayane, and we'll talk for maybe about 50 minutes or so. Unfortunately, I'm not able to interpose your questions as we go along. I suppose I could, but I'm kind of insecure and don't trust myself not to get off track and cover the range of subjects that I wanted to. So you can enter a question at any time in the Q&A box, and I'll look at the questions at the end of the period, and I'll try to give priority to those questions we have not already covered in the preceding conversation. At about 7 p.m. or so, we'll break away for a very short tour of the Spark Media Lab and let you know what resources are there and how you might be able to access those. And with that, please join me in welcoming Gayane Grajian to the Burbank Public Library this evening.
Hello, everyone. I'm so excited to be here. I think this is such a great opportunity for everybody to have access to such a great program with Spark Lab. I wish we had this 20 years ago when I, graduated college and was getting into the field and had no idea where to begin. So this is a great opportunity. Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, I'll start with a basic question. I know a lot of our audience may know this, but for those who are just new to the subject, why does film that's been shot have to be edited? What are you trying to achieve in editing a film? And how do you know if a film has been edited well?
Yeah, I think mainly the main reason why we ever edit anything is because you have a lot of raw footage that comes to you and you want to tell an overall story. And editing is so important in that process because it creates emotion, it evokes feeling, right? So you want to edit a piece to have your audience and your viewer feel what you're trying to tell in your story. And that's why I think it's so important. I don't think editors get enough credit, because even though a film is shot and a director does their job and a writer, writes the story, I think it's the editor that brings all of those things together and delivers a final product to the viewer.
Mhm. So at what stage in the production of a film does editing take place? I mean, and can you give us some idea of like what are there steps when you go to edit a process, a first step, a second step? Does it change from time to time?
I think it differs from film and from reality or documentary pieces. In film, you'll shoot things, and then as they're filming, they'll do raw cuts so the director can have his cut and see how things are working out, and he gives his notes while they're still shooting. In the reality world, from the way it started, was you shoot everything and then you bring it back to post-production and you make a story out of everything that you've shot. And sometimes in reality, you don't have that chance to go back and pick up things that you missed or that you didn't shoot at the time. So I think it's different for documentaries and it's different for reality. There's also scripted shows that are they cover their things so well, but again, once production wraps, then the editor is kind of stuck with what they have. So in film, they have the raw cut to the director, and then in reality shows and documentaries, it's like once shooting is wrapped, then you have to work with what you have. So I think that's the difference. But editing usually takes place towards the end of things.
Are there other people you work with, or does anyone else tell you how they want something edited? Or the decisions like independent decisions you make? You work with a team of people, other editors?
So I'm going to talk about the reality world that I'm in and that I've been working mainly in the last 10 years. The way it works is you shoot everything. A story producer gets to look at everything that's been shot, and every episode has a story that's, that wants to be told. So you'll get a string out, which is the rough cut from the story producer. And from there, you go in and as an editor, you kind of put your touches to it. You clean up the audio, you clean up the video shots, you add music, sound effects, graphics, and that goes through different variations of notes, which are the notes process. So, and then it gets passed on to the executives and they get to watch it, they give their notes, comes back to you to as an editor, you apply those notes. So it's like this big process, but the first thing you get as an editor is a string out from your story producer, to get a rough idea of what the story for that episode is going to be.
Hmm. Hmm. So adding like music or sound effects and things, that might be something you try the first time and see if they like it, and then if they say no, then you take it out. But it's not really. It seems like it's a single that you're making as an individual editor, a range of decisions across the board. It's not necessarily a team that's interjecting something about sound or music or anything.
So we have this saying in post-production, an editor gets their first cut. Their first cut is the editor's cut. After you do that first cut from the string and you pass it along to the executive, the network executive, and everybody kind of gets their say in whether the music is correct or the graphics are right. Then it becomes not other people's cut, but it's not yours completely as an editor, because there's so many different inputs from everyone else. So your first cut is your cut, and then after that it's
so as a measure of how well you've done, how little you get edited in subsequent versions, or
yes and no, because sometimes as an editor your instincts are correct, and there's so many people who have their opinions of how it should look and how, so it's, it kind of changes. And sometimes, most more than less, it goes back to the way the original had it. The editor had it originally. So you'll go through this notes process of 3 rounds of notes, and you'll go back and say, wait, that's how I did it the first time around. So I
Mhm.
editor to be a good editor, you just do it instinctively, and then everybody kind of gets their say in it, and so
Mhm.
back to the way you originally cut it.
And so if you work with somebody and they keep coming back to where you started in the first place again, do you get more slack then the next project that you work on with them, or no? Is it always a process?
Yeah, it's always a process, because you go from, that's another thing about being freelance, is you go from company to company, and unless you choose to stay somewhere, but it's almost like you're always proving yourself to the
Mhm.
the new company, and to the new executive, and you work with different executive producers every time. So it's almost like you have to prove yourself, and you work
Yeah.
together until they're like, okay, I trust your decision making, or I trust how you're approaching this.
So unfortunately, it doesn't come up often enough where somebody says, I worked with Gayane before. She always turns out to be right about this. So I'm going to go with what she's suggesting this time.
Yeah,
It's just not really like that. That would be ideal.
right. I wish it was that simple, but it's, it's not. It's still a process. It's always, you as an editor, you're always working as a team with your story producer. Sometimes your music supervisor who walks in and says, hey, that cue that you use, I don't think it works, or I have a better, cue. And you as an editor, my number one advice is to never get attached to anything, and always be willing to, be fluid.
Mhm.
It's, editing is, many parts moving together. It's like an endless motion of things. And you just have to be okay with change, and never
Mhm.
get attached to whatever you think is so great, because somebody will come in, music, supervisor, a director, a story producer, sometimes even the cast, if it's, a big name show, sometimes the cast will say, I don't like the way I look in that shot. Can we change that?
Mhm.
You are, going through footage looking for another shot just because this feed
What
doesn't like
what are
that.
some of the shows that you've worked on, Guyane, that some of our viewers may have seen?
Um, a big variety of things. I have a lot of reality experience. I think the Kardashians is probably one of the bigger ones for, older folk who remember Real World, which was one of the first reality TV shows that actually opened the door to this field that everybody thought was just, going to disappear. But Real World, I've worked on. This was the newer season that just happened this last year, I believe, in Atlanta. I've done Flavor of Love. I don't know if any of you remember that. That had this big, spin-off with New York, and I Love Money. I've done a Netflix show that was called Christine McConnell's Creations. I've done a scripted show called 10 Items or Less that was on TBS. And then our documentary, which was very close to home for me, called 100 Years from Home. So it's a mixture of things.
So I suppose there's a lot of people that, may just have a vague idea that they'd like to be involved in the entertainment industry in some way. And how is it that you found this? How did you decide that this was a good fit and this would be something you'd like to do?
Mhm.
I
I'm a
mean,
California girl. I was raised here in LA, and I went to John Marshall High School, which at the time had media, program, and I was a they would do campus news, which was a weekly production, and we would do newscasts. And I started from there, and then just went to Laverne, and knew that video and um, broadcasting was what I really wanted to get into. So I went to Laverne, and then after that, I wanted to be a newscaster, but I was only 21 when I graduated college, and I didn't want to move out of state to a smaller market. New York and LA are the top two markets, and
mhm.
I just wasn't ready to do that. So I fell into post production and LA was where I stayed. And again, I started off at the bottom. I was a logger, a production assistant, a gopher, go for this, go for that, whatever needed to be done. Even though I had a bachelor's in television broadcasting, I almost feel like everybody has to start at the bottom and then slowly worked hard, stayed dedicated to what I wanted to do and loved editing. I felt like editing is where everything came together and just do it.
So is the way your career, is the way you fell into it and the way your career developed something that you would say was typical of video editors, or are there all different kinds of routes into this field?
I feel like there's all kinds of routes, but one of the main things is just starting at the bottom. Getting your foot in the door is knowing somebody or sending your resume out as to many different people as you can. And a lot of it is, being at the right place at the right time. Sometimes a production company needs somebody, right away, right then and there, and they have a resume in hand. They're like, okay, let's give this guy a shot. And sometimes you could be the best candidate, and at that moment in time, they don't need anybody. So, you know, and there's a lot of people who also take, classes online nowadays. That's also available, and you can take, classes and have a certificate, and they also have, ways to get you in, because that's what their access is to, the production world or
I noticed that the union offers some education and classes as well. I don't know, that you have to be a member for those, or?
So a lot of people join the union with hopes that they can find jobs and that it's going to be easy because, as a union member, the reps will fight for you but it's really hard to also get anything in the union. It's expensive. You have to pay an initiation fee to get in. But the union jobs are, I guess, better jobs, if you like to say, where it's steady income. You're not freelance. You're not looking for the next gig every 12 to 18 weeks. But you can join the union and do classes there as well.
So I guess my next question was what kind of skills and education you needed to do this job. But it sounds to me like to some degree you had these kind of interests and skills to begin with, but then in another sense you found yourself involved in jobs that help you develop things and qualifications as you went along. Is that a correct reading, or?
Yes, you're right. So when I first did touch any kind of editing program, it was Tape to Tape, Media 100, and then Final Cut Pro had just come out. So that was very exciting. But the first time I ever touched an Avid in the professional world was when I was an assistant. And I didn't do that until I went through being a production assistant and, being a court clearance coordinator, doing all kinds of other things. And then once, I would do it on my own time. I would sit with an assistant editor and say, hey, I'm really into this. Can you teach me? And so it's kind of like you learn as you go, but you also have these, skills in your back pocket of being dedicated.
Explain what an Avid is, that you have one open behind you, right?
So this is the Avid Media Composer that a lot of the jobs that I work on use. There's also Final Cut Pro and Adobe Premiere. Those are the main top 3 editing programs that are used in the professional world. And they're able to handle 12, camera shot shows and a lot, maybe 30, I want to say it's 36 audio tracks that you work with, where you have room for your music, your all your ISO audios from all the different cast members that are on. So it can handle big editing, jobs and big editing shows. A lot of film is also cut on Avid.
I was wondering, but now I'm not sure that this is the right question to ask. I wanted to ask what a typical day is like as an editor, but there may not be a typical day. I'm coming to realize. Does it change every day, or is there's some set of tasks that that are basic to each job every day? And also, where do you do this job? Are you doing it at a company? Are you doing it at home? Do you have a work and office space? Do you have equipment that you rent or buy?
That's a lot of questions. Start with the basics. So it depends on where you are in your cut, as to what kind of day you're going to have. If you're just starting out on an episode, you get your string out and you're just cutting down as much as you can. You're tightening your audio, your shots, you're picking all the different angles. And then once I'm done with that, I'll go do the scoring, which is putting in the music, adding the sound effects, and then adding extra graphics or title cards, whatever is needed. And then that's the beginning of the episode. If you're into the episode later on where it's notes, you walk into the office or your remote station and you have your notes and you're just typing in the time codes of every note that you have from the network or the executive, and you're fixing all the things that they want you to change, which might mean going back into video, picking a different angle, picking another song, choosing another score because they don't feel like what you have works. And right now, because of the pandemic, I'm working from home. The equipment that I have, the last 2 jobs that I had, they provide all the equipment. And how it works is you remote into your office at the production company that you're working in, and you're accessing all the footage and the program from there. So you remote in to your office space and you have access to all the footage, all the media, because that takes a lot of space, and I don't have the drives or the space to handle all that media. So you remote in, that's one way. Another way is they provide you with a drive that has all the footage. And so what you'll do is you'll plug in this drive, you have all your footage here, and every night we will use Dropbox or some other form of program to save your cuts, so then everybody else can have access to watch what you've done. It's a tricky system, but that's kind of where we are because of the pandemic.
How much capacity does that drive that you just showed have?
I think this was a 4 terabyte, I think it was a 4 terabyte drive. So you'll have your drives there, and you have to keep downloading all the new music that you get and all the new footage, and you just download it directly onto the drive. But it's posted for you in Dropbox, and you download it from Dropbox onto the drive, so you can have it locally on your desktop.
And in surveying different companies in town and what they do, I've noticed, especially with the advent of the pandemic, but also just with the advance of the technology, where they want to be able to share the product with everybody who might have any input. Security seems to be a big concern with that. Are there security protocols for material that's sent to you that are concerned to companies? You have to sign off, I'm sure, on certain confidentiality agreements and stuff like that.
Yeah, so in the past, we've had problems with footage leaking, or results of a game show leaking onto social media, and the company can come back and sue whoever has done it. It's very hard to keep track of that, but that's something that as editors, we sign a confidentiality agreement. We know how important and how sensitive the material is that we work on, and we cannot whatsoever show or share anything until the air date, until that episode is aired. And that's also another very touchy subject that companies are very, very aware of and make use of things.
What about credit for your work? Is that something that is part of what you negotiate with an employer beforehand, or does it depend on how much you were involved in the project?
Yes, right when you when you're looking for a job as a freelance editor, number one thing you always do is negotiate your rate, your hours, and a lot of companies have no problem giving you the credit, but you also have to be adamant about getting that credit. And whether it be an editor or a lead editor, it's just something that's in your contract right from day one. And
Mhm.
they can't change that. They can't go back on that once that contract is in place.
And that's important for getting future jobs, right?
Yes, absolutely. Especially if you're a lead editor and you've done all this work and at the end of the day you want to put that on your resume, but you don't get that credit from the company, that's when things get a little muddy.
Mm.
What kind of hours do you put in on your reality,
Is that
typical reality show?
a trick question? There is no answer project. That's your life. You're there for however many hours it takes to get it done. I think that's the best way I can put it. You're contracted to work 10-hour days. And again, in the beginning, when you're putting your episode together, that, that was a pretty good amount of hours. But once it gets into the note process and you have to do these crazy deadlines, you have to get it done no matter what. So you stay and you just get that job done and you get the cutout to the network. They don't care how long it takes.
Yes.
So standard would be 10 hours, but there's days where you work 12, 14, 16 hours. I don't want to discourage anybody from becoming an editor, because it's very rewarding once the project is done and once you've handed your cut in and it looks great. But yeah, hours.
Sure. You're always under hard deadlines because the
There's
broadcast time for the show is set and you have to be ready.
Right. And there's air dates and you just have to meet those deadlines.
Well, that kind of leads into what the next question was. I think you've answered it in some respects. Is it just giving viewers an idea of the nature of employment in the job? Because I guess the media industry has a reputation to being a project to project or gig kind of industry. I don't know if it's becoming even more so, but it seems like editing, you don't go to a single office and work for a single employer for a long period of time, or not for very long. That you are constantly changing jobs. You constantly have to be on the lookout for what the next employment opportunity might be.
Yes. So it's a big networking career to be in. You're always looking for your next gig. You're going to wrap in April, you need something booked for starting May, so you're always looking, you're always networking, you work with a company, you want to do your best job, because it is a small industry. As big as it is, it's still a really small world. So if you worked on a show with so-and-so, that so-and-so might end up on the next show, and everybody, shares names and throws names into the fishing bowl, and it's one of those, you want your name to be picked out because you've done a good job on the previous show. So it's demanding, but I think if you're good and you do your best, you can easily network and move on to your next show based on the reputation that you've left from the previous show that you've worked on. And it's also not only how well you edit, it's how well you work with your team members. I think that's a big thing that plays into this industry. It's not just your skill set, it's also how you work with the team, because editing is such a big teamwork, team effort. If you're very resistant to the changes that I was talking about, if you don't want to follow the notes, or if you don't want to work with your story producer, that kind of reflects on your future career, of your next job. So that's, I think, a good point.
Is there like is there an ideal work situation for a video editor that you would describe, or does it change depending on what you like to do, what parts of the job, the subject of the project you're working on, or is it individual? I guess.
Yes, I think editing is such a creative process. So once you have your basis of your string out, you as an editor want to go in and be creative and do, your crazy thing. One ideal situation would be to just be left alone, to let you do your craft, and instead of being micromanaged. I don't think anybody likes being micromanaged.
Mhm.
As an editor especially, you kind of want to, at least for that first cut, you just want to be creative and do your thing.
Right.
Work with one producer, loved him, but he would sit on the couch in the office behind me and he would say, okay, I don't like this, so change that. But before I could even get a chance to do it. And at one point he said, I'm sorry, I'm being a producer. And I was like, wait, what does that mean? He said, I'm being a douchebag and a producer. So he was my couch producer. And that's not something what any editor would like to have. So
Mhm.
being left alone, at least for the first cut, would be ideal.
Can
Mhm.
you explain what a string out is for people who are not familiar with that term?
A hangout usually consists of it's actually your story cut in the rawest form that your story producer will pass on to you. So you'll get the interview bites, the reality, the shots, the b-roll shots. B-roll shots are also known as establishing shots, or beauty shots that you want to show before you get into your story. So they'll have all of those elements in the string out, and it's your job as an editor to go through, clean it, cut it, again, add the music, sound effects, and graphics. So string out is your base of, where the story begins, where the middle part is, and where it ends.
Do they give you that or do you
Yeah.
create that?
Yes.
Okay.
So nowadays, story producers also have access to the Avid, which is great because technology has advanced so much from 10 years ago. Even before, we used to have paper cuts as an editor, so you would have to go in and plug in all the time codes and cut all those different shots in yourself based on the paper cut that a story producer would give you. Nowadays, a story producer will have that already pre-cut for you, and that's what you get as an editor. It's
The
very
producer just does a rough assembly, in other words. Do they do it themselves or do they have an assistant that does that?
it's both. So you have a story
Mhm.
producer. A
Yeah.
story producer also has an assistant story producer. That's why it's so many different hands, or so many team members playing in to what you get as as an editor. Because editors also have assistant editors, and that's another thing I think that gets overlooked. Is it's such an important job to be an assistant editor. I was there for a couple of years before I became an editor, and an assistant editor is how you normally would be before you turn into an editor. And an assistant editor will do all the media managing, bring in all the footage, get all the audio correctly in line, group all the cameras. So what happens is you have a shoot with 8 different cameras, 8 different angles. And before I see any of that footage, it goes to the assistant editor, who brings it into the system, who has to match all of those frames up correctly where all the cameras are in sync, and then group them all together. So when I see it, if I want to change an angle of a shot, I have a complete 8 camera shot, and that the assistant editor has put together for me, so then I can easily pick that shot that I want. So assistant editors, God bless them.
I think we've touched on this a little bit, but I think it's probably the question that everybody in our audience wants to know. And so maybe you could kind of summarize what you said before, and if you had anything to add. I'm sure everybody wants to know how you find work. How is it that you come by jobs? How do you get your first break? That kind of thing. How do you sustain a career in this?
Yes. So again, it's the big networking word that everybody throws around, but that's what it is. So once I'm done with the job, or before I'm done with my job that I'm on, I'll throw out my little antennas. That's what I call them. I'll send out emails, of old producers or executive producers, and say, hey, I'm available starting so and so date. Do you have anything available? So that's my personal way of doing it. Sometimes I'll go on to different job websites. Realitystaff.com is one that I use, and I'll see who's hiring an editor, and I'll send out my resume that way. There's also ways that you can, friends. It's again who you know. So you will just let your friend know, hey, I'm available. Friends as in editor friends, people that you've worked with in the past, if they know of anything, because everybody's always moving to different companies. So I'll, have my old editor coworkers that I work with that have become friends, and I'll say, I'm available. Do you have anything at your company that you're working at now? And send the resumes out constantly.
So it's mostly through the network rather than through postings and things. It's mostly the connections you've developed.
Yes. And even though I do send out my resumes through the postings, it's very rare that I'll get a job through the postings.
I see.
Very promising to hear as in, a newcomer in the industry, but it never hurts to just keep sending it. Again, it's, the right time in the right place.
Hmm.
Starting out, I think that's
That's
kind
interesting.
of,
Well, the pandemic has changed, I guess, this model a little bit. And we were talking before, and you know something about that. I was wondering if you could tell us how it's changed things and whether you think that was a trend already in progress, or is it going to go back, or is it going to morph again into how you find employment and work?
yeah, it's so hard. Right now, I'm working for a company that's based out of Knoxville, Tennessee. And I'm able to work on the show because I'm working remotely. And I can just log into the system out in Tennessee and be able to do what I'm doing from home. And I feel like it was going in that direction. Um, and the pandemic just kind of expedited that you know, to getting there sooner. uh, Going into the office is a great thing because you have that social atmosphere. But as an editor, you kind of are, isolated to do your job until it's time to turn in the cuts and get the notes. And so it's hard. It's the pandemic is really, but fortunately, we could still work. We were down. A lot of production companies went dark for about a month, and then they picked up because people need content. It's just content is everywhere. So, um, yeah, I'm not sure if I answered that, but
Um, I think you touched on this a little bit before too, the difference between editing for episodic television as opposed to reality-based television. And I don't know, if I recall, it seems that you enjoy the reality-based television more. I don't know if I'm that's a conclusion, but I think we're all kind of fascinated in about reality television a little bit, how that all that footage gets put into something, a storyline, and that's comprehensible. And so maybe you could talk about that a little more.
yes. Reality television has evolved so much from where it was. It used to just be you shoot and then you go and you create the story in post. Nowadays, it's you have a story you're trying to get from the cast and where you're wanting to go. And so a lot of your interviewing, takes place with the story that you want to get in the back of your mind. So you go into shooting it as I want so and so to have this storyline, and we're going to touch bit, cover everything, and we're going to ask them questions. So it's almost produced. A lot of it is pre-produced before being shot, and then you fine tune that story in post-production. So that's where reality has changed. With episodic shows, it's very structured, and I think that's where the clash happened so much about 10 years ago, was when it was the Writers Guild would say, hey, I think reality producers should get writing credit because it's evolved to the point where we are writing a lot of things pre-production and then shooting it. And they got a lot of pushback because they said, well, it's not writing like scripted writing, because in scripting, it's, you do a lot of the editing before it ever gets shot. So there was that, but I feel like it's different. Scripted shows are so structured. You have a script, you follow it. Every shot is chosen. And with reality, even, they're producing it, but things happen in the moment, while they're shooting it, that can change the whole storyline. So it's reality is just all over the place. And as much as we try to control it, it still can be all over the place. Whereas with episodic, this is what it is. It's very strict. You follow the script. Even as an editor, you just have to follow the script.
Was there any reality show that you worked on that they were making changes right up until the air date?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, we get that all the time. You'll have a locked cut, and the lock cut will go to 2 or 3 stages of a lock cut. So it'll be lock cut number 2, lock cut number 3, because and I've said this before when we had our meeting, there's a saying in post-production, and in the reality world, the first season of whatever you're working on, the cast works for you as a production company. And if it's a successful show, the second season you work together, the cast pushes back a little, and you push back as a producer. And then the third season, if they're very famous and popular and the show's taking off, then you as the production company work for them. So as the cast members, they'll come back when the show is locked. They get a note pass as well, where they get to say what they liked about the story, what they like, what they don't like. So once you're done and you're like, okay, I've met my deadlines, we have all the network notes, now the cast comes back and says, let's change this interview bite, I don't like it, let's change this shot. And so a lot of shows that are successful go through that process. I don't want to name any names, any shows, but yes, it happens all the time. Especially,
Yeah, this is being recorded, Gayane. So
yes, and well into its 3rd or 4th, 5th season. Mm-hmm.
What of the work you've done in your career? Is there a single project that you're proudest of, that you got the most satisfaction out of working from? What are the sources of satisfaction and rewards in the job, beyond compensation?
Yeah, I think when it's something that you're personally touched by, that's the most satisfying. The documentary that I did, the 100 Years from Home, is the one that took us about 5 years. I think I had 2 kids in the process of it. Was probably the one that I would say I'm proudest of. It was a collaboration with director Jared White. He was great. And the main subject is my cousin Lilit. And it was her journey into finding her home, long lost home, in Turkey. And that was just an amazing project to be a part of.
Is there some project or some kind of work? I mean, what is there something you want to do yet that you haven't had a chance to do in this?
Yeah, I think I would probably want to do a big film. And it's a different process. Film and reality are totally different. And even scripted episodics are completely different. Film is a lot slower, and you just have a lot more time to cut it. And you get to have your input. So I think that would be like my next big step.
That's partly a result of budget. The higher the budget a project has, the more time they're going to spend on everything to get it just right, because they need to justify the expense.
Mm-hmm. Yep, absolutely.
And we have a number of questions here, and maybe this would be a good time to take a look at some of those. One that I thought was interesting. There's a question: have you ever edited a music video?
No, I have not edited a music video. What I used to do, I used to cut live shows. So I used to cut concerts that were shot, 4 or 5 different cameras would be at the concert venue, and I would cut those. So live concerts I've cut, the different angles from different point of views, but I've never done a music video. It's totally different world as well, because things are so quick. And that's one of the things about editing different projects is the pacing is so important. So music videos are cut. That's a different, and even in the ad world, when you work in commercial, that's in its own world as well, because it's almost every second counts, because a commercial only has 10 seconds or 15 seconds. Those ads that you see on YouTube, your show will start in 5 seconds, right? And they put in as much as they can within those 5 seconds. So editing different, music
Mhm.
ads is totally different.
Someone was asking what the job of a logger is. I mentioned that in your description, and I didn't really know either. So maybe you can.
Yes. So a shoot takes place, let's say, for a month straight. And if you work on a reality show that's, home based, or a game show competition, you have 6 different cameras shooting it. And you, as a logger, you get all that raw footage. And back then it was pilot, where you would sit there, you would watch the raw footage, and you would have to type up, from time code to time code, let's say 2-3 minute time code, of what the description was that was happening on that specific tape at that specific time code. And so as a story producer would go in and say, I'm looking for a shot where so and so is jumping up and down. And so you, as a logger, would say, at 5 minutes 40 seconds, this cast member is jumping up and down. So a logger kind of logs all the footage before it gets to the story producer. So then the story producer can construct their story based on, the footage that we have.
I think I might combine 2 questions in this one. Somebody would kind of wanted to know what they should focus on. I guess I don't know whether they meant academically, if they were interested in editing. And then there was another question about certifications. Is it important, like somebody's asking what AVID certification level should someone achieve? And I didn't even know that there were certification levels. So maybe you can say a few words about that.
If you don't have a full 4-year college degree like I did when I got into the industry, there's a lot of different outlets. Like Moviola is one of them, where you can go and take specific AVID courses or Final Cut courses or Premiere courses, and get certified as, basic AVID. And then there's different levels. So it's like AVID 2, AVID 3, and you can get those certifications and have those be on your resume as experience. Because starting off, it's really hard to get in with you're not an editor, but you're applying for an editing job or an assistant editing job. So those certifications come in handy in that way, and you get to learn the system before. Otherwise, you would have no other, way of touching them except for the Spark Lab, which has Final Cut, right?
Here's a kind of seasonal question. Somebody wants to know how you can possibly, working from job to job, keep track of your taxes. How does that work?
Oh, sure. Okay. Most of the time you get a W-2. A lot of freelance editors choose to incorporate themselves and go the 1099 route. But I know California just recently passed a law that makes it a lot more difficult. So it's just, you get W-2s and you collect them all and hand them over to your CPA and let him do all the figuring out.
I used to have to make quarterly payments.
Yes, if you're
Estimate.
incorporated, yes, Jim, I don't want to cut you off, but if you're incorporated, you can do your yes, you do your taxes quarterly.
Somebody's asking whether there's a preferred video editing software for somebody who's starting out. Do you have a
Yes.
feeling about that?
I think Final Cut is very user friendly starting off. Just bringing in, importing your footage and getting, different variations of whether it's pictures or audio, like music tracks, MP3s, or, movie clips. Apple makes it very friendly to bring it into Final Cut and then just start from there, just kind of, playing around with the different tracks. It's very user friendly. Avid's a little bit more intricate in organizing the footage and where you can bring it in and all the different specs. But I think Final Cut is, I'm not, very much aware of Adobe Premiere, but I think Final Cut is the one where to start.
And several of the questions here are focused on, I know we talked about different routes to getting into the industry and things, but it seems that a number of the questions, people are looking for a basic suite of skills that I guess would be absolutely necessary if there are such a group of things. They kind of want to know what do I need before I even try? What do I need to have prepared and under my belt, before I, that a potential employer would find essential in my background.
I think the number one thing is drive. You have to be driven. Number two, you have to be organized, detail oriented, because there's a lot of things that go into editing, a lot of different parts, whether it be the audio, the video, the graphics, the music. So you have to be focused, driven, very sharp. I think that's what a lot of employers look for as well. It's like, what potential do you have to make a great show? And that comes what's your skill set as far as your habits, whether you're dedicated to getting something finished on time, and just, detail oriented, I think is a big part of it. Checking yourself, double checking your work. Yeah. And then, it's a program like any program. Avid, you could learn, Final Cut, you could learn, but it's applying yourself that I think counts the most.
What about, are there internships available in editing, and are those valuable as far as getting a first job?
So I did an internship at ESPN sports, and I'm not a sports girl at all, and I used to sit there and have to look through footage of the highlights of football, and it was the most uninteresting thing. But that really got my foot in the door with the executives and the producers that were there, and it's a matter of just showing, yes, I'm there, I'm gonna do what you tell me to do, because I really want to touch the software and get to see what the program is. So internships are valuable. It was unpaid. I used to have to drive to Santa Monica, and the drive and the traffic was crazy, but do it, even if it's because the value in internships is, again, the people that you meet, the network that you're going to create, and you're going to maybe reach out to that person in 3 years and say, hey, I interned, can you please?
How might you find an internship? Is that usually through school? Is it a school program, or?
I did it through school, but there's also, if you go to any of the major production companies, there's always an internship, tab, because everybody's looking for free work. I hate to put it that way, but yes, they're willing to take your, hours that you're willing to give them and train you and teach you. So a lot of it, just do the research, go onto the production company's websites, look for the internship, because that's your foot in the door as well. That's a really good way to get in. Even if it's not paid, do it. It will pay off in the long run.
Someone wants to know if you get to hang out with celebrities.
Our reality cast members considered celebrities, B-list celebrities. We'll have rap parties, and sometimes they show up and sometimes they don't. You don't want to be that crazy fan, especially a lot of post-production world that you're just kind of cool. I've seen some, but
I have a last question here before we go to a little tour of the lab, Gayane. I think we touched on this a little bit before, but somebody's asking once again about the distinction between I think film and episodic television and reality TV, and they want to know in reality TV, are there separate roles for graphics editors, for picture editing, and for sound editing? Or is it like you described before, where you might be involved in doing all of that yourself?
So it depends on the budget of the show. If it's a higher, budgeted show, you will have a music supervisor who will help you find the cues and, help you score. A lot of the graphics comes from a graphics house. So the company will pay for a graphics package, and that's where we get, the graphics. Um, the titles and all that is built in Avid. So we have I guess the producer, the co-producer will give us an idea of what they like and what they don't like. So we'll go and build those. Um, yeah, so it just kind of depends on the project. And if it's a high budgeted show, they'll
Mhm.
have the money to splurge and reach out to a graphics company, or, get a music supervisor with music assistants who will help you pick out. And there's some projects where you're just kind of on your own. Do your thing. Here's a library. They give you a library of music, and you have to sit through and sift through, the cues and what fits well and what goes well with the section that you're cutting. If it's if it's a emotional moment, you have the emotional cue to get that feeling out of the viewer. If it's, something that's suspenseful, you use the eerie cue, and you just kind of have to go through that library and pick it yourself as an editor.
Well, that's great. I'm sorry I don't have a chance to get to all of the questions individually, but I think I've grouped some of the subject areas together, and we've covered most of the ground in the question area. And Gayane, I want to thank you for so much information. I suppose we could go on for hours, and I'm sure all of the people who this is the kind of thing I think that people are looking to get oriented and understand, how you get involved and what you need to do to join the industry, find employment, how a career develops. I think these are all things that are questions that they're kind of uppermost in mind of the audience that we have here tonight. And so that's exactly what we needed, and I appreciate it so much. We're going to go to Jim Cody, my colleague, who's going to show you a little bit around the Spark Media Lab. That's about 5 minutes. And then we'll come back and I'll have a few concluding words. And there's a survey we would like people to stick around for. And we'll tell you about that. That'll just be a short link that comes up when we end the program in a few minutes. So let's hand it over to Jim. Thank you so much, Gayane.
Thank you so much.
Okay, can you hear me, Hubert?
I can.
Okay. Hi, I'm Jim Cody. I'm a librarian assigned to the Spark Lab at the Burbank Central Library. I should have introduced myself earlier. I was the other person that was on the chat asking questions. Well, we're still new at this, so we're still figuring out all these details. You can see where I was sitting right over there. This is the Spark Lab. It's at the Central Library at downtown Burbank. We have, as you see here, we have 4 iMac Pro computers. One of them has Adobe Premiere, you see right there in the center, loaded. All 4 of them have Adobe Premiere, and all 4 of them have Apple Final Cut Pro. That's Final Cut Pro right there. We also have right here, we have some sound equipment up right here. This is our mixer and a couple of speakers. We have digital audio workstations installed on these computers also. And going around to the other side of the lab, we have 4 gamer computers. These are Alienware computers. They are also loaded with Adobe Premiere Pro. That's a Wacom tablet in the foreground. And then swinging around here, you see there's a 3D printer we have. And continuing around, here's another 3D printer that we're just getting set up right now. And here's some of our lights. And we have a green screen here, so we can do some video projects. We don't have a lot of room, as you can see, but people have shot a few things in here. We've been closed since last March due to the pandemic. So we haven't, this is still new and we're still getting set up. So when the pandemic is over and people can, come in the library again, anybody can, sign up to use the Spark Lab, and then you're free to practice on these kinds of software that we have. And as I said, relating to tonight's program, we have Final Cut Pro and also Adobe Premiere Pro. And I don't know, I think that's about it. Let me see. I can take a couple of.
They can see postings on our site, Jim, as to when the lab becomes available again then on our library website, right?
Yeah, you'll have to check on the library website. I did notice there were some questions during the program about resources for learning. We do have a few things on our website. If you go to the Spark Lab page on our website, it does have some material, some links, to YouTube videos and stuff like that, that can give you an introduction to, some of these types of software.
Mhm.
So I don't know if I don't see any questions. So I guess back to you, Hubert.
Okay, thanks. I want to express my thanks to Gayane for her willingness to share her experience and knowledge with all of us. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Thanks to my colleague Jim Cody for the tour of the lab, and to all the staff here working behind the scenes who made this program possible, and also for the support of the Friends of the Burbank Public Library. When the program ends, we'd really appreciate your participating in a survey and giving us your advice. We're sort of feeling our way along with this, and we'd like to be able to consider doing something similar for other media industry specialty fields down the road. So your opinion as to whether this was useful to you, how we might improve, and what specialty you might want us to look at down the road would be much appreciated. And thank you all so much for participating this evening. Thank you.